Here is a puzzle that sits at the center of the options market. The S&P 500 can look almost sleepy, its volatility drifting lower, while the 500 companies inside it are swinging around like it is a storm. How can the whole be so much calmer than its parts? That gap is not an accident, and it is not a rounding error. It is a real, measurable, tradable quantity called dispersion, and it is powered by one hidden ingredient most investors never think about. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it, because it quietly explains why the market's most watched fear gauge can fall even on days when individual stocks are lurching. This is the story of that hidden ingredient, and of the trade built on top of it that behaves beautifully right up until the moment it does not. Here is why this matters to anyone who watches the market, not just to option traders. The calm you see in an index is often not calm at all. It can be individual stocks moving hard in different directions, cancelling each other out inside the average. That is very different from a market where everything is genuinely quiet. The two look identical on the surface and are opposites underneath. This is also why the VIX, the index fear gauge, can slide lower while the news feels chaotic. When the pieces move a lot but out of step, the index they add up to can barely move. So the first real payoff is simple. A low index volatility reading is not proof of safety. It can be a sign that risk has been hidden by the way the pieces are moving, not that risk has gone away. So let us name the pieces. Every stock has its own expected volatility, how much the market thinks it will swing. But an index is not just the sum of those swings. It also depends on how tightly the stocks tend to move together, and that togetherness is called correlation. When correlation is low, the moves offset and the index sits quiet. When correlation is high, the moves stack up and the index roars. The exchange even publishes a read on this, an implied correlation index that estimates how together the biggest names in the S&P 500 are expected to move. And since September 2023, a dedicated dispersion index that measures exactly this gap between single stock volatility and index volatility. In other words, the thing most people ignore now has its own ticker. The question is what it does to prices. Now the mechanism, and it is the whole point. Think of the index's volatility as the average volatility of its members, but then scaled down by how loosely they move together. When correlation is low, that scaling is severe. The index can look far calmer than the typical stock inside it. Its volatility looks, in a word, cheap. Cheap relative to what you would pay to own the volatility of the pieces. That difference is exactly what a dispersion trade tries to harvest. The classic version sells volatility on the index and buys volatility on the individual stocks, betting that the pieces will keep moving more than the whole. As long as correlation stays low, that position quietly collects the gap, day after day, like picking up steady coins. It feels like a free lunch. And that feeling is the trap, because the entire position is a bet that the stocks will keep moving out of step. It is short one thing above all else: correlation staying low. Here is where it gets strange and where the coins turn into a steamroller. In a real shock, correlation does not drift up, it leaps. When fear takes over, investors stop discriminating between companies and sell everything at once, so the stocks that used to move out of step suddenly move as one. In the COVID crash of March 2020, the implied correlation among big S&P 500 names surged from around 45% early in the year to roughly 85% within weeks, with average constituent correlation climbing toward 80%. When that happens, The index volatility that looked so cheap explodes, and the side of the dispersion trade that was short, the index gets run over. Meanwhile, in calmer stretches, the opposite happens. Through much of 2025 and into May 2026, dispersion ran high and pushed the headline fear gauge lower. Dispersion actually reaching a one-year high in May 2026, near its record from the tariff turmoil of April 2025. Same mechanism, both directions. The gap is generous precisely because, once in a while, it bites. So here is the takeaway. Dispersion and correlation are not a buy or sell button. They are a lens for reading what a calm index actually means. When single stocks are lively, but the index is quiet, that calm is being manufactured by low correlation. And it is exactly the kind of calm that can vanish in a day if a shock makes everything move together. When the pieces and the whole are both quiet, the calm is more real. Neither one tells you what happens next. What they tell you is what the market is assuming, and whether that assumption is fragile. The forward question worth sitting with is this. The next time the headline fear gauge is drifting lower and everyone relaxes, is the market truly calm? Or is it just betting that 500 companies will keep politely moving out of step?